Thank you so much, Kara, for welcoming us all here. And it's a joy to be back with all of you. I get to teach uh, in this community a couple times a year, and it's always wonderful. So we'll begin with a meditation. And so this meditation will be a practice of connecting with the good, wholesome qualities that are in us, that are sometimes asleep, but that only need to be awakened in order to experience them and to benefit from them. And we'll also, in the second part of the meditation, practice to care for a seed of suffering that may need our attention. So if there's maybe a medium to mild difficulty that you're aware of in your life that you'd like to bring into this meditation, it could also be a big difficulty, but I would probably discourage you from choosing the most difficult thing, just to build up the muscle with something easier first, if it's not something you've practiced to meditate with, just so you don't get overwhelmed. So something that's, in the relative zone of difficulty could be an irritation or difficulty with someone, or a challenge at work, or something you're struggling with in yourself. So the first part will be connecting with our strength, our clarity, our tranquility, our equanimity, our freshness, bringing up these qualities that we all have. And then the second part of the practice will be drawing on this beauty, this clarity in us to help us to hold and massage and care for and embrace something that's needs our attention and needs our care. So, yeah, thank you everyone for being here today and for your bodhicitta, your mind of love, your aspiration to practice, because that is what we need to nourish ourselves and really make the breakthroughs that are possible in our consciousness. So just beginning by appreciating ourselves being here and letting ourselves settle in to find a comfortable position. We'll be meditating for 30 minutes in this guided way. The whole time we're together is a meditation, but the formal practice will be 30 minutes. So choose a position that's going to be supportive for you. Sitting, you could also choose lying, you could also be standing. And if your body needs to move, like rocking or swaying, whatever will really take care of your body and whatever is up for your body today. So once you've chosen your position, allowing the body to settle. So feeling where your body is making touch with the floor, with another surface, maybe a chair or your bed or a couch or a cushion or wall. So noticing the places of contact. And as you breathe in, feeling these places of contact. And as you breathe out, releasing the weight of your body up to the support of the earth. So with every exhale, letting your body rest and sink a little bit deeper into the support that's underneath you, around you. To bring awareness to your forehead, and as you exhale, let the muscles of the forehead soften, release tension. And then to the mouth and the jaw, the tongue, as you inhale and exhaling, letting go, letting the jaw release and the tongue be soft in the mouth. And inhaling into the shoulders and exhaling, allowing the shoulders to release, get a little heavier as they flow down, further down from the ears. And breathing in, being aware of your arms and hands. Breathing out, letting them rest on your lap or on the floor. And breathing in, being aware of your chest and your belly. And breathing out, letting your chest and belly open and soften. Releasing tightness, tension. And breathing into your pelvis, the hips, the buttocks. And breathing out, letting this part of the body give itself over to the earth. Releasing tightness, tension. And breathing into the legs and the feet. And breathing out, allowing the legs and feet to rest and let go. And being aware of your whole body. Letting your whole body settle, come into stillness and rest. Now I invite you to bring to mind, bring into your heart something that you feel grateful for, something that is nourishing you in your life, bringing you happiness at this moment in time. Something small, something really big, important. Something as small as gratitude for the ability to have an internet connection, to be able to be on this call. There's something as vast as that there's air to breathe and that we can breathe in and breathe out. Whatever it is that's arising for you right now, what are you grateful for? Allowing that to fill your yourself, fill your body, fill your mind, a sense of gratitude. Gratitude can help our hearts to open like a flower, opening to the sun of wisdom, of compassion. So allowing the flower in our heart to open, to radiate. Getting in touch with the energy of freshness in our lives. Touching the quality we each have to look at life with fresh eyes, with a beginner's mind. Perhaps even visualizing a flower if that's helpful for you. Or seeing yourself as a flower, rooted in the earth and this beautiful, colorful blossom opening up to the sky. And bringing to mind something that creates this feeling of energy, aliveness, freshness for you in your life. Maybe it's something you like to do, like swimming or horse riding or taking a shower or walking along the ocean or holding hands with someone you love, laughing with children, gardening, petting your dog or cat, playing a sport, whatever it is that gets you in touch with this feeling of vitality, of interest, curiosity, being in the flow of life, of offering yourself, being engaged, a sense of freshness. So seeing yourself in that situation and allowing yourself to feel all the things you would feel in that moment of aliveness and freshness and curiosity and interest. If it is particularly perceptible in a particular part of your body, then allowing your attention to rest in that part of your body where you notice freshness and energy. Breathing that in and out, letting yourself bask and bathe in this quality of freshness, of being a flower, sharing yourself with the world, offering your beauty, your strength, your fragrance. Taking a few breaths quietly as we just enjoy being human flowers. Now I invite you to bring to mind the image of a mountain. And we're going to see ourselves as mountains as well. So a mountain is solid and stable and immovable. And so are we. The same quality exists in each of us, this stability, this steadiness. So you can visualize your head as the peak of the mountain, your shoulders, your torso as the sides of the mountain, and the base of your body as the feet, the foot of the mountain, base. And feel yourself maybe growing even more erect, getting a little taller, embodying stability in your posture. And breathing in this quality of the mountain, and breathing out the reality of our stability, of our steadiness, of our solidity. Seeing ourselves as a mountain, experiencing stability in every cell of our body. A mountain is stable in the face of storms and very violent weather, grave difficulties. The mountain doesn't shake or move. And we have that same capacity to bear and endure and remain stable in the midst of the storms of life without being pushed over. We have the capacity to provide stability and strength to others when they need strength. That's our mountain nature. Letting yourself rest in the mountain that you are and take refuge in that. And now we'll turn to the quality of spaciousness, to cultivate that quality in us. So visualizing yourself like a bird flying in the sky, or like the full moon sailing through the night sky with so much space around you and a very deep sense of freedom. There are no obstacles, nothing constraining you. Vast space surrounding you. Maybe you're sitting on the top of a high mountain where you can see all around, miles and miles in every direction. It's a sense of unboundedness, of limitless space. Breathing in that sense of space and breathing out with freedom, experiencing freedom inside and around us. Space, free. So the experience of freedom is always available to us. The wisdom that there is space inside and around us. It's always there. Sometimes it's asleep in the depths of our mind and we feel tight and constricted and stressed and under strain. But even in those moments, we can touch that seed in the soil of our mind. We can remember what it feels like to be completely unrestricted, unrestrained, to have so much space and time and possibility. So we're practicing that now so that it is available to us when we need it. Breathing in, space. Breathing out, free. Dwelling in freedom. We can offer this space and freedom to others as well. That's the meaning of true love, is to give someone space, the freedom to be who they are. So we learn to offer it to ourselves and to those we love, to everyone. So now do a very brief tending to suffering. So I invite you to bring to mind the situation in your life that is causing you difficulty, that's challenging for you. And noticing as you bring it to mind how it feels in your body as you bring this person or this situation or maybe this aspect of yourself to mind. So see if you can connect with where you notice this in the body and what the qualities of this challenge, this difficulty, this suffering are. Is it something quite fuzzy, kind of something confused or hazy? Is it something sharp and painful? Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it moving around? Is it something solid and stuck like a big block? Is it a tingle? Is it a groaning? Is it like sludge, like something grimy? So getting a sense for the quality of this difficulty and where you feel it in your body. And with all of the resources that we just connected with, our freshness, our solidity, stability, our spaciousness and freedom, bringing an embrace to this challenge of allowing it to be here. Maybe putting it in your heart or allowing it to be surrounded by these strengths that you also know you have. So not pushing it away, not denying it, and also not becoming carried away by it and over-identifying with it, that's me. I'm this really difficult thing that I'm experiencing. That's all I am. But allowing it to be here. It's a tender, suffering, hurting part of ourself. Maybe it's angry. Maybe it's feeling despair. So opening ourselves to really feel it and be with it. Giving it space to be here. We can hold it in our arms like we would an upset child. With kindness, with compassion. Breathing in with it, breathing out with it, knowing our breath will help this upset child to calm and to feel some relief. We can let it know it's okay that you're here and it's okay that you're upset. You don't have to be in a good mood to suit me. You can be just the way you are. A gentle honoring of this painful part of ourselves. And very compassionately embracing, holding this painful spot in us. I'm here for you, you might say. I'm taking good care of you. Just being here with you. Mindfully staying present, offering my attention. Allow you to be, to feel what you need me to feel. And just being here with you, not leaving you alone or pushing you away. holding you lovingly. And maybe this painful part of you begins to relax just a little bit or feel more ease. And if not, that's okay. Continuing to honor it and be there with it. And then asking it, what does it need from you in this moment? What would it like? How would it like to be met right now? And just listening. And whatever that is that you might sense this part of you needs from you, seeing if you can offer it to this part of yourself. Now or in the future, just affirming that you will try, you will respond. We'll take a few breaths now as we just feel into this experience now, what's happening in the body, what might have shifted, what is this emotion experiencing now, or how has it changed? It might have turned into something else. So being present to what's alive in the body and the emotional field right now. And knowing we can return to take good care of this part of ourselves, and at any point in our meditation or in a quiet moment during the day, but we'll say goodbye to this part of ourselves for now and let it know that we're going to continue to take good care of it and to listen to what it needs. So opening to that sense of spaciousness and freedom once again. Touching back into the quality of the mountain and stability. And coming back to the nature of flowerness, of freshness, of aliveness, energy, curiosity, openness. That's always there in us as well. Breathing all of that in, knowing that is who we are. We can always access that. Breathing that out to share with the world. And as you're ready, you can gently open your eyes if you had them closed and transition back to our group together. Thank you for your practice. So feel free to take a moment to gently stretch, take good care of yourself. And so I want to share on the theme of our call today, which is understanding our minds, healing blocks of suffering in the individual and collective consciousness. So I want to share about a teaching that's been really helpful for me, that I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh, my teacher, about how our minds work. And he talks about there being many layers of our mind. And I had wanted to draw a diagram, but I didn't get paper. I've been on a retreat, so. So he draws on the board this circle, and then he draws a line across. So there's an upper and a lower level. And so the lower level is the store consciousness, is what we might call the basement of a house where we keep all these things. And the upper level is called mind consciousness. And that is like the living room. It's like where the things in the basement, if you bring them into the living room, then they have life. So they come to life. So if you keep your record player in the basement, when you bring it to the living room, you put on a record and it starts to play music. So another way of thinking of these two layers is like soil in a garden. So under the soil are these seeds. And when a seed is watered, it sprouts up and it manifests at the level of the mind. So according to Buddhist psychology, there are 51, or some traditions say 52, different numbers, but they're, a variety of seeds in the depths of our minds. And we all have all the same seeds. We all have wholesome seeds. We all have unwholesome seeds. So we have the wholesome seeds are like our generosity, our seed of forgiveness, our seed of mindfulness, of compassion, of equanimity, of insight, of concentration, our seed of being practicing ethically, being honest, seed of a sense of humor, of being able to let go. And then unwholesome seeds, we all have all the same unwholesome seeds of discrimination, of violence, of judgment, of hatred, of ignorance, of greed, of dishonesty, of being closed off. And then there are some seeds that are indeterminate, that depend on the situation, whether they're wholesome or unwholesome. One example is sleepiness. Like it can be wholesome when we really need to rest. Sometimes sleepiness is there as a way to avoid things, as a way to shut down. And in that case, it's more unwholesome. So we all have all these seeds. So I find that teaching just alone very liberating, to know that when I get angry, when I get insecure, when I get jealous, that's not something particularly wrong or bad about me, but that's part of the human condition, that everyone has that seed. And some seeds in us may be stronger than others because of our ancestors, the ways we were raised, in our culture, in our communities. Certain seeds got watered without our choosing. We may have a big seed of fear if people around us had a lot of fear, or watered that seed of fear in us, told us that we weren't safe or we couldn't do things, or made us feel more insecure. So that seed might be bigger depending on our particular history. Other seeds might be smaller. Maybe our seed of confidence or of joy is really big because of how we were encouraged to be, and the things in us that people saw and nourished. And what's so important about our mindfulness practice is, so what happens, the dynamic of how these seeds work is, they're there asleep under the surface in the store consciousness. And in the upper level of our mind, we're always taking in sense impressions through the sense doors. So if you think of that upper layer of the mind having like 5 doorways, so there's a doorway of the ears, a doorway of the nose, doorway of the mouth, doorway of touch, doorway of eyes. So things are coming into our mind all the time, and we're also producing thoughts in our mind from within. And all those things are falling down into the depths of our mind and watering certain seeds. So the things we see, we hear, we touch, we taste, we smell, and the things we think, those are the 6 senses in Buddhism. All those things are nourishing seeds in the depths of our mind all the time. So we want to know which seeds are getting watered, because we are often unconsciously watering unwholesome seeds. We're watering seeds of fear, seeds of doubt, seeds of craving, seeds of discrimination, seeds of violence. I have a friend who mentioned that when she'd go shopping, she would always look at the magazines at the checkout line. They always have these magazines. So she'd just look at the regular magazines, and she would notice after looking through them that she wouldn't feel very good about her body image. So just subtly, just looking at pictures of these supermodels and women, with, fitting into this very unattainable image of what a woman should look like, that she would not feel good about herself. So she decided to stop. She consciously decided to not look at those magazines as she'd go through the checkout line. And she noticed she felt better about herself. So that's just a little example of all the different sense impressions, which is a kind of food, right? We eat food, but we also, another kind of food are all the things that we consume through our senses throughout the day. We want to really check out how those things are nourishing the seeds under the soil, because the key to our liberation is how we take care of those seeds in the store of our mind. So if we have a seed of fear under the soil and we water it, it arises into the mind consciousness, into the living room, and it's an actual energy. It's no longer a potential that's asleep under the soil. It becomes the energy of fear. And we feel all the hormones, all the neurochemicals that get released in our body that cause us to go into fight, flight, freeze. Our life can get shortened by constantly nourishing fear. It can cause aging to happen faster. It can depress our immune system. So all these things happen when fear arises in the mind that change our body chemistry, and it has a real effect on us. We start to look at things in a certain way. We start to see things that might not be there because we're so afraid. We misperceive. So when we nourish fear in the mind consciousness, in the upper level of the mind, when fear is allowed to be there for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, the seed of fear in the root, in the store consciousness, so that root of fear at the seed level gets 5 or 10 minutes of food, and it gets a little bit bigger. So the next day or the next week, when something happens, that seed of fear arises faster, and it's more intense, and it lasts longer. So we experience ourselves becoming more fearful. The more we consume things that feed the seed of fear, and the more we allow it to be up in the mind, the more airtime we give it on this radio station, then the stronger it gets, and the more it manifests spontaneously all by itself. So you can see how it can create a vicious cycle of the more fearful we become, the more we experience fear, and the more we experience fear, the more fearful we get. And so on and on, we become more and more fearful. So there's another way to do things, right? And we all know, right? Maybe we ourselves have a certain seed that we've allowed to become very strong that's unwholesome. Maybe we've nourished the seed of anger a lot, or nourished the seed of sadness, or the seed of self-doubt, or the seed of judgment, judging others. We know where that goes, right? That we nourish that seed and it comes up and it does not make us happy. It takes over the living room and it colors the whole of our mindscape. It's like we shut the curtains, everything gets very dreary when that unwholesome emotion has taken over. So we want to bring in mindfulness, and we all have the seed of mindfulness. This is a beautiful thing. And one of the most beautiful things is one of the conditions for mindfulness arising in the mind is previous moments of mindfulness. So every time we practice noticing our breath, noticing our body, noticing what's happening in our emotions, taking a pause to just feel what's here, what's happening, that nourishes the seed of mindfulness. It gets bigger. It gets more likely to arise. It's stronger. It will last longer when it does arise, and it'll be more intense. So we can cultivate mindfulness. We can cultivate all of the wholesome seeds. We can consume foods through our senses, through our sights, through our eyes, through our ears, through our nose, that nourish the seeds that we want to nourish in us, of compassion, of clarity, of stillness, of presence. We should nourish them every day. That is what the Buddha taught. We should nourish the wholesome and avoid nourishing the unwholesome. We can do that every day. So when we nourish the wholesome, when an unwholesome seed arises, we can do something about it. We don't need to let that unwholesome seed take over and make us do things that we don't want to do, which is often what happens. So when an unwholesome seed arises, like fear, it's like this seed has come up and it's now manifesting above the ground, above the soil. So then we call up mindfulness. As soon as we notice, that this has entered the living room, we need adult supervision in there. So we bring up mindfulness, and mindfulness doesn't fight our fear. It doesn't push away our fear. It doesn't judge our fear. It doesn't say, why are you feeling that way? That's not who I want to be. That's not who I am. Mindfulness doesn't do that. Mindfulness has no preference what it's going to be mindful of. It's happy to be mindful of our joy. It's happy to be mindful of our equanimity. It's happy to be mindful of our fear, of our self-hatred, of our jealousy. It doesn't care. It wants to just be with whatever is. So mindfulness comes and it embraces our fear. And it says, oh, I see you, fear. First of all, it recognizes fear is here. And then it says, oh, it's okay. You can be here. It doesn't push fear away. Just like we did in the meditation. And mindfulness says, I'm here for you. I'm offering you my presence. I'm being here for you. And we breathe with it. And we try not to get into the storyline of it, the thinking about it. Why am I fearful? I shouldn't be fearful. Or what happened? How can I stop this coming about? No, we just experience the fear and be with it. We feel it in our body. We notice it. We breathe with it. We allow mindfulness to give it space and to inquire into how does it feel? What is it like at the body level? And can I be with it? Can I just allow it? And mindfulness has the capacity to hold it. Sometimes our mindfulness isn't strong enough. If the block of suffering that arises is so big, we might not have strong enough mindfulness. So then we need to find a teacher, find a community, find a friend, find a therapist, a group of people that have mindfulness, and we can draw on their mindfulness to strengthen ours, so we can be there with this painful emotion, with the seed that's arisen. I have done that. I have asked people to help me hold a really difficult emotion. So mindfulness holds it, and as it holds it, because all these parts of ourselves, they're so used to being pushed away, because that's our first inclination, is to avoid anything painful. So our tendency is to either vent and express and explode into whatever this emotion is. So we completely identify with it. It runs away with us, or we suppress it. Those are the two usual paths we take. But mindfulness is a third middle path of being with it, not letting it take us over and also not suppressing it. So that's exactly what the parts in us that are in pain want and need. Just like a child that's crying or that's upset, they don't really want to be left alone. They don't want to be judged or yelled at for being upset. But all they really want is to be held, to be spoken to with kindness, to be accepted for how they are. You know, they don't want to be fixed. They don't want to be told they're wrong, shut in the closet. They just want to be held. And if you think about yourself as a child, or you know other children, what happens when they're held, when they're soothed by someone who cares? Usually they calm down if they're not being yelled at or told to stuff it. They start to settle down because the nervous system of whoever is holding them or soothing them starts to calm the nervous system of the child. So that's exactly what happens when mindfulness comes to embrace fear or any painful emotion. It starts to let that part of ourself know it's okay that it's there, because it's a part of us. So it starts to calm, it starts to settle, and then it starts to reveal itself to us. So at that point, when the emotion is beginning to settle, then we can begin to inquire and look deeply to understand it. And then often all by itself, we don't even need to do much. Suddenly it's just this awareness is there of like, oh, I see this fear comes from this situation I experienced a long time ago, not just what I'm experiencing in the present moment, or this is my mother's fear or my father's fear or my community's fear, or we may understand something about it that we hadn't understood before that helps us to be a little more free. And so then that seed of fear, it comes back into the form of a seed. So the emotion that was alive is now weaker, weaker, weaker. It comes back to the form of a seed. And every time we do that process of bathing our painful emotions with mindfulness, the seed in the storehouse becomes smaller. That's the beautiful thing. We can affect these seeds in the store of our mind. So in a fearful situation with that smaller seed, we're less likely to become fearful. And if the seed of fear is activated and arises, it will be less intense and it will last less long. It won't be there as long. So you can see how we can cultivate a lot more happiness, a lot more well-being by how we take care of these mind states when they arise, and how we avoid watering them, how we don't let them arise to begin with, if we can. And sometimes we can't. So when they do arise, if we take care of them right away, they come back and they're transformed. It doesn't mean it goes away. Just one time you do that and then you don't have the seed of fear anymore. It's a long time it takes to transform the seed of fear. But slowly, every time you do that, it gets smaller, 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 and less likely to disturb our mind in unwholesome ways. So I also want to mention that there are sometimes blocks of suffering in our consciousness that have accumulated over time, especially if we practice suppressing. So maybe something has happened that was difficult for us in our childhood, or maybe something happened in the people who took care of us in their lives, and that got transmitted to us, even though it didn't happen to us, but we have that same block in our consciousness. And this is more than just a little seed of suffering. It's like a big clump of suffering. Part of the reason why many of us keep the upper level of our minds constantly full of stimulation is because a part of us knows, unconsciously or subconsciously, that there is this block of suffering under down in the basement. And so we're always doing things. We stay busy. We always have to read a newspaper when we have free time, or we look at our phones, or we're listening to music, or we watch TV, or we listen to the news, or we need to talk to people, or we have to go shopping, or we have to eat something, or we have to do, so that there's no quiet, still space in our mind. Because when there is, that block of suffering rises because it's needing attention, it's needing our care. So if it doesn't arise during the day, guess what? It'll come up in our dreams, and we'll have a nightmare, or we'll have some memory. Something arises in our dreams because this block of suffering is down there. It's a presence. It's alive. It's needing to be seen and recognized. But what often happens is we will avoid it. So we'll fill up our mind with everything we can to not feel it. And sometimes that manifests in addictive patterns. So we might turn to drinking in order to not feel that. We might turn to drugs. We might turn to a sexual addiction, or shopping addiction, or become addicted to our work, or extreme sports, or something, so that we get so focused on something sensational and external that we don't have to feel that block of suffering that's always under there asking to be seen. If we keep doing that, the thing about that avoiding pattern is often the things we turn to, say it's sadness, that's this big block of suffering, maybe some kind of even depression. We might turn to things that make us sad, like listening to sad music, or reading things that are really sad. Or maybe we have some fear in there, that block of suffering is some unresolved trauma, something we're deeply afraid of. We might turn to reading really scary books, horror movies that water the seed of fear. Often the things we use to avoid the suffering end up watering that same block of suffering. We don't intend that to happen, but that's often what does happen. So if we have a seed of shame and we become addicted to a substance, we drink to avoid it. And then after, when we have that hangover and we're no longer drunk, we feel more ashamed. And that just nourishes the shame. And then we want to drink more, and we feel more ashamed. And so at a certain point, that block of suffering gets so big because of how we're nourishing it unintentionally, that it bursts through into mind consciousness. And we find ourselves in a really deep difficulty, with a breakdown, with a burnout, with, needing to be hospitalized, or completely shutting down. Like we just can't function because that block of suffering has taken over. So that's very dangerous. When Thich Nhat Hanh draws this diagram, he draws a thick line between mind and store consciousness. When we try to avoid the block of suffering and we keep our mind consciousness always occupied, he draws a thick line between mind and store. It's like we create an embargo. We won't let anything in store consciousness arise. So not only do we not have access, we cannot feel the pain down there. We're numbing ourselves, but we also can't feel our joy. And this is something neuroscience has found also, that when you try to numb one, you can't just numb one part of your brain. If you numb one part, you numb it all. So you get numb to everything. So it becomes a very dangerous situation of poor circulation in our psyche. We start to cut off parts of ourselves. So then inevitably there's going to be a deep imbalance that's going to manifest in some kind of physical illness, some kind of mental illness, some interpersonal breakdown happens where you just end up, destroying a relationship suddenly because that thing sprouts out into your mind, and you say things, you do things that you regret and could change your life or their life forever. But that doesn't have to be that way. We can restore the circulation in our psyche by doing that exact process I mentioned. We can slowly, first of all, we need to stop consuming things in the surface in the living room. We need to stop having the living room be 100% full all the time, day in and day out. We need to create space. So coming into places of meditative stillness, silence, being in nature, turning down the technology, turning off, having some technological sabbaticals, not running away, but beginning to turn towards these parts of ourselves that need our care, resourcing ourselves first through learning mindfulness, learning body practices that help us be in our body, yoga, qigong, tai chi, different things, running, being in nature, singing, dancing, moving, resting, eating with awareness. So all these things help us to clear out all of that. A lot of it's garbage. A lot of it's, you don't need, I don't feel I need to hear the same news story 6 times in a day, right? But that's a lot of us consume same story over and over and over and over again. Why? Right? Sometimes it's to avoid these things. So we clear out that and we begin to slowly allow the block of suffering to emerge and hold it with mindfulness and care for it and take good care of it and restore that circulation. Every time a piece of it can come up and be bathed in mindfulness, it goes back down, it's smaller. And so it's like we're digesting that part of our lives that hasn't been able to be digested, and slowly it reduces, and it's no longer this part of ourselves that is hidden, that we're ashamed of, that we can't tell anyone about, or that we can't even look at clearly ourselves. We begin to integrate it. We begin to see, well, this is a part of who I am. It's okay. I can forgive. I can honor that this has been my journey, and it can teach us a lot. Those blocks of suffering actually become the lotuses of our enlightenment. They're not something that we want to throw away. They're actually the very things that help us to awaken and to develop our compassion, our joy, our love, our equanimity, so that we can, honor other people when they're in that deep difficulty. We can see them as being on a journey that they can also transform. They can also learn to love and honor themselves and care for themselves and care for others. So no part of ourselves should ever be thought of as needing to be thrown away. There's no garbage. There's only compost, right? So this beautiful phrase, no mud, no lotus. The lotus only grows in mud. Lotus is the symbol of awakening. Mud is our suffering. So the lotus, the awakening, comes out of the suffering. So we don't want to throw it away. We don't want to push it away. So I'm going to pause there. I wanted to also talk about collective suffering and how we can heal collective blocks of suffering. Maybe we'll get to that in the Q&A. But I'll pause here and invite you to share any questions that you might have. Oh, and before we go to that, I want to just share again that Worldwide Insight offers an invaluable opportunity for people to connect live to Dharma teachings from anywhere in the world. So if everyone gives a small donation, it would really help support me and the other teachers each week, and the considerable costs of Worldwide Insight, which can only continue with your support. So please offer dana using the button below the video. And I also want to ask, Kaira, could you put the link in for the course again? There's some people who joined since you introduced it. I actually didn't see it the first time, so maybe you could put in the link for how to join the course that I'll be teaching starting next next week. It's on the Brahma Viharas, the 4 aspects of true love taught by the Buddha. But the course is called Moving from Separation to Authentic Connection. And it will cover some of the things. I just put in the link, I found it. It'll cover many of the things we were talking about today, going deeper into how we can really learn to love ourselves and others. So consider joining us. So I see, oh great, thank you, Kaira. I beat you to it. So here's a question. Great. I'm just gonna make sure I'm recording. Okay. So thank you for this question. How can we heal our collective blocks of suffering? So just like we have blocks of suffering in our individual consciousness, we have a collective consciousness, right? We're all influenced by the collective consciousness. If we enter a place where many people are practicing peace and serenity and joy, that starts to affect us and we begin to feel those emotions. If we enter a place where there's people and they're feeling a lot of fear or a lot of anger, a lot of stress, that also starts to communicate to our nervous systems. We have these mirror neurons in our brains that we pick up what other people are feeling and we begin to feel that. So we say stress is contagious, right? If you're in an office or workplace and someone's super stressed out, other people's shoulders tend to start going up towards their ears. But similarly, relaxation, ease, tranquility, peace, those are contagious too. You're around someone who's radiating this sense of peace and ease, and you start to feel that as well. That's why we practice together with others. That's why this kind of call is so important, to be together with others. So we have a collective consciousness. And so there are blocks of suffering in the collective as well. There's intergenerational trauma. There's collective trauma. There's a wonderful resource that I ran into recently. It was in October. There was an online collective trauma summit. One of the organizer was Thomas Hübl, a teacher in Germany. He had many different presenters, but one of the things he talked about was how we actually live in societies that are shaped by unhealed trauma, like our institutions reflect previous generations' unhealed trauma. So I'm from the US. If I think about the ways my education system, public education system in the US, the medical system in the US, the military, the economic system, while there's certainly many things that work well, and there are many people in these systems that have very good intentions and lots of compassion and lots of clarity and insight, there's a lot of dysfunction in these systems as well that results from unhealed trauma of the people who founded these systems. I mean, my country was founded on slavery. You know, it was founded by people who owned other people, and they were talking about freedom. Very, very from the very first, the DNA of this country, there was a discord between the intention and what was actually being done and lived by people. There was a being out of harmony, out of coherence. It was uncoherent to think of starting a country on the basis of liberty for all, while some were holding others, humans, captive and dehumanizing them. So we have, a society that's been formed by unhealed trauma. And Thomas Hübl was speaking about one generation's trauma being like snow that falls, and because it doesn't get healed, it doesn't get understood or metabolized, and it freezes. And then the next generation's trauma is snow, and that sticks to the first layer of snow. So you get this huge impact impacted mass of frozen trauma from one generation to the next to the next. But what was beautiful about what he said about that image is that underneath all that trauma are all the answers we need to heal climate change, to heal an unjust economic system, a dysfunctional medical system, a very oppressive, globalized society where very few, 1% of the population owns 90%, 95% of the wealth of their resources. So those solutions are already there. Just we don't need to discover them. We don't need to go find them. They're there in each of us. That's our enlightenment. That's that lotus that can bloom from the mud of our suffering. We have a collective lotus that can bloom from the mud of our collective suffering. And so I wanted to tell a story about how I saw this in action as I was a nun on a trip to Vietnam with Thich Nhat Hanh, my teacher, and our group of hundreds of monastics and also lay practitioners. The purpose of that trip, this was in 2007, was to do 3 ceremonies. They were called mass requiem ceremonies for healing in Vietnam, both in the north, in the center, and in the south. So these were 3-day-long ceremonies. 10,000 people came to each one in all these different places. It was the first time in the history of Vietnam that the suffering of the war was being acknowledged publicly. So people were invited to share the names of their loved ones that had been killed in the war and where they had died and how they died. And this was we were praying for all people of all, whatever background, North, South, whether they were with the pro-communist or pro-American or not, none. So anyone could bring the name of their loved one, how they died. And so we had long lists of names that were stapled to altars. There were altars all through these temples. We had these big temple complexes that agreed to host these ceremonies. So there are thousands and thousands of names on pieces of paper and then offerings on the altar. And then we had a chant master from Vietnam who was skilled in tantric chanting and mudras, was guiding us, and Thai was sitting there next to him. And then the monastics, we were chanting all night long. All night long. We didn't get up for hours and hours. We didn't eat. We didn't go to the bathroom. We just sat there chanting all night long. This went on for 3 days. Offerings, ceremonies. And it was like the first time in this country's history since the war that the collective consciousness got to be massaged, that there was this circulation that got to be allowed, this block of suffering of all these people who lost loved ones. Sometimes their whole families were wiped out and they didn't even know sometimes where they were killed, how they died. They disappeared. They could grieve for them. This block of suffering was allowed up into the mind consciousness of a nation and was massaged, was held, was lovingly, the grief was allowed to be there. Everyone was asked to be vegetarian during those 3 days. Everyone was asked to keep the precepts in their family homes during these 3 days. They were asked not to yell at their family members, not to fight each other, to keep an environment of like a retreat at home, to meditate, to pray, to call all these who died violently and painfully, tragically, to come and be healed by this chanting. And I'll just tell you a few stories of some of the things that happened. And I don't claim, you don't need to believe them, but they move me. So I'm just sharing them with you and you can do what you want with them. But in Hue, I believe, one of the ceremonies we did in the middle of the country, people went to this river where many people had been massacred, and they put this big cloth in the river to invite the souls of those who had died there to come onto the cloth so they could bring it and bring that as part of the ceremony. Well, this was just a piece of cloth. And after they did the chanting and ceremony, inviting these souls to be there, like nobody could pull the cloth. It was so heavy, they couldn't pull it out. It took like 10, 20 men with lots of effort to finally get the cloth out of the river. And then another thing that happened was this was in Ho Chi Minh City, I believe, at the temple where we were chanting. They had a pole that was straight up a metal pole with the flag that was at the sort of the peak of this, the highest point of this center. And during the ceremony, during the chanting, it just bent over. This straight, solid piece of metal just got weighed down by something and it bent over. So these were some of the things that I heard. Another thing I noticed for myself was every day, every ceremony, each time we did it on the third day, it rained. Every time as we ended the ceremony, it rained. So for me, that's an example. And I had a very profound personal experience as we chanted, just looking at my own suffering, feeling I was also inviting my own ancestors in my blood family to come, and there was healing happening for them that I'd never experienced before. But it's something that I thought about after that, those very like life-changing ceremonies, that this is something we can do, we can repeat, we can do it in the United States. Many people are doing things like this, like in places of the Holocaust, concentration camps, doing ceremonies of healing, of forgiveness. I know there are people that have done a walk through the United States along, places where the Middle Passage, where boats came and sold people from Africa. They walked through the United States. But I think these kinds of ceremonies we need to do more of and figure out also around healing the damage we're doing to the earth, coming together to grieve, to honor the earth, to allow this block of suffering in our collective to have circulation and begin to heal, so that all these solutions that are just under the surface of our collective trauma can arise and keep us from self-destructing. So thank you for that question, Lori. There's another one from Ginger Cloud. Hello, thank you so much for sharing these teachings. You offer so much compassion and sweetness in your presentation. I'm curious to hear about your Vipassana sit and how that experience mirrors or is different from Thay's teaching of the Dharma. Thank you for that question, Ginger. So I am a Dharma teacher in Thich Nhat Hanh's lineage, and I'm also becoming a teacher in the Vipassana tradition. And I found silent retreats in the Vipassana tradition to be very beneficial and complementary to my Plum Village practice. I think there's a big emphasis on community in Thich Nhat Hanh's lineage and on personal practice, but as it relates to how you connect with others, especially in the monastic community, it's so much about Sangha. And the Vipassana practice in many places that I've encountered in the US is not so much about community as about like really mastering techniques of meditation. Of course, Sangha is the jewel in all Buddhist communities, so that's a jewel that's very precious and it forms in these retreat centers, but then, you're in silence the whole time on a Vipassana retreat. So what I found was beneficial for me there was really getting different kinds of meditation instruction than I had gotten in the Plum Village tradition, that in certain ways were more specific. Like I learned a lot more about the Brahma Viharas in the Vipassana tradition, because there were specific ones for each of the 4 Brahma Viharas that I had only learned them as one, like metta meditation. And then of course, we were encouraged to practice compassion and practice joy and practice equanimity, but I hadn't learned like specific meditations to cultivate those on their own. And many different kinds of ones. And in the Tibetan tradition, there's also very specific ones that cultivate joy, that cultivate equanimity. So I think, that's been a lovely complement to the a lot of, in the Plum Village tradition, a lot of training in loving speech, deep listening. That doesn't happen that much in Vipassana because you're in silence. But then this deepening and getting to know your own mind through just the meditation practices in the silence. But I see they very much complement each other, and I'm very happy to be part of both traditions. And both of them are changing, and there's more silent retreats happening in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, and there's more people in Vipassana talking about we need to develop more of a teachings around community and Sangha. So Thank you for the question, Ginger. This is from Kobe Rivlin. I notice people in my life often not admitting they are suffering, stressed, or in pain, and are very defensive to the idea they have the power to transform and heal themselves and their environment, as it is perceived by them as being blamed. How do you recommend to approach them with compassion and help? So thank you, Kobe. I think that's, we live in a society that's more and more, globally, that's more and more it's not okay to be vulnerable. If you think about the populations that are most vulnerable, children, refugees, people of color, poor people, women, in many countries, in many places, life is becoming more hostile. Society is becoming more hostile to these people that are more vulnerable. There's less and less of a social net. There's less and less tolerance, for refugees, for people who are different, at least in the mainstream. And I think that's a collective response of fear to knowing that we're at a turning point right now. We're coming to a precipice where we have to change or cease to exist. We have to figure out how to let this mud become a lotus. So because of that hatred of the vulnerable, that I think many people in power hate the vulnerability in themselves, and so it gets projected out as hatred, as fear of those who are vulnerable in society. So I think that's quite a tendency. And I don't know, Kobe, if some of these people you experience this happening with tend to be more male or masculine identified. But I think that's also something that's very hard for those who are male identified to allow vulnerability. And it's not something society has allowed men to experience, or even women who are in more positions of power. They don't allow themselves to be vulnerable. So to help them, I think we need to understand that this is something that's they're caught in, that they may not have chosen. So we don't want to judge them, that they're also suffering a lot when they can't own up to and they can't feel into their own suffering. I think one of the best things we can do is be practicing to embrace our own suffering. And sometimes just being around us, that can have an effect. But maybe just, very gently. It's so important not to impose anything on anyone and not to tell someone we know what's happening with them, because it needs to they need to feel that they have space to discover. And also that we really want them to not feel judged, but to maybe just begin to be the mindfulness to their suffering. So if it's someone you're close to just say, I notice that you're tense, or I'm feeling like I see the lines in your forehead. Are you worried? When someone goes like that, when they're worried, or just being the mindfulness of reflecting back to them the ways that we see their suffering without judgment can maybe begin to help them notice that they're also suffering. So sometimes, how we might be holding something and we're not even aware of it, and someone else says it to us, and then we realize, oh yeah, I'm like all tense, or I'm all worried. Or someone just comes and puts a hand on our shoulder, and we start to relax. We didn't realize we were tense, but they put their hand on our shoulder and they helped us to feel. So just connecting with them, helping them feel your compassion, your care, your non-judgment, and maybe gently reflecting back to them that you see their suffering, that you see that they're in pain, and that's okay, and letting them know you're a safe person to be with if they want to explore it, if they want to learn to be with it. So thank you for that question, Kobe. Alice, we got a lot of questions coming in now. So I'm happy to go over time, if that's all right, Kara. And those of you who wish, you can stay on with me. I'll just keep answering as many as we can. So Alice writes, I initially tried to use a situation causing me stress and anxiety at the moment to work with. However, I found it difficult not to be sucked into the feelings of anxiety. I then switched to another issue, which is more about feeling hurt and sad. This worked much better as I felt able to take care of that hurt. Is this meditation appropriate for anxiety or better for emotional distress? Thank you for your teaching. Thank you, Alice. What a good question. So appreciate how clearly and carefully you were tracking your own experience as you tried to practice this in the meditation. I think this meditation of embracing our emotions can also work with anxiety, but I think it might be that we need to stabilize our mindfulness so that it's stronger in order to deal with something more provocative or more triggering. So, or it could be that having someone with you, or even tuning in with someone on the phone or on a Zoom call who can meditate with you, could also help so that it's not so overwhelming. So either strengthening your own mindfulness or getting in, calling in more backup to help you hold it, and then bringing it up and asking other people to help you hold it. One of the things that I want to just share about this that I find a beautiful practice that you might consider doing with others, it's called Vipassana out loud. But it's basically like that process. And Tara Brach and other teachers in the Vipassana tradition, I gave you Thich Nhat Hanh's version of rain, bringing up a difficult emotion and embracing it. But in the Vipassana tradition, it exists as a practice called RAIN, R-A-I-N, 4 steps: recognize, R, allow, accept, A, investigate, I, and N, nurture. So nurturing yourself, not identifying with the suffering, but nurturing and taking care of yourself as you look into what that emotion is and, what it needs from you. Wonderful resources all over the internet for free. There's a new book Tara just wrote about rain also, but you can do this out loud, and she shares how to do this in her book, where you have a partner. So you don't have to have a teacher. No one has to know more than the other to do this together. But you do the rain practice together. And some of it's in silence. Some of it's where you're sharing out loud what you're experiencing. So that could be a way also to get at this more triggering anxiety, where someone else is with you and then you're not so overwhelmed by it because you're not alone with it. So you might look into that book, look into those resources. If someone can look online and just see what the title of that book is and put it in the chat, that'd be great, so people can find it. Okay, so we can go over just a few minutes. Okay, thanks, Kara. So I'll just try to answer one other question. Okay, Annie, Amelia. Here's Amelia's question. What can you say about childhood abuse, physical and verbal, and the things you said? I have experienced this and feel how big the fear is. It can feel so deep. And changing the narratives, criticism, through being aware of them and choosing other ways hasn't been easy, nor the journey of understanding and being compassionate with that. I mean, trying to observe fear hasn't been enough, but that there are other things involved that can take very long to be aware of. And then Amelia adds, I mean, it's not just about letting go of the expectation of not ever having fear again. It can be helpful in certain ways, as each emotion is, but how difficult it is to live with so much fear. That's all. Thank you very much. So there's a couple other questions about fear as well. So I hope what I'll say will be relevant to some of the others as well. So thank you for this question. Thank you for your vulnerability, for asking, and I just appreciate your courage for bringing this, because it can be such a deep experience, like paralyzing fear. when we've had these experiences in our childhood. So you talk about how the journey of understanding and being compassionate with that is not very easy, and that it's not enough to observe the fear. So it is a journey, and there are many, many, many angles of, where the healing comes. And I think, really that step of recognizing that this is there, and getting ourselves resourced to really be with it, to really hold it and care for it. And I hope I didn't explain it in a way that made it seem like it was easy or quick, or, this big block of suffering would be over, in a short time. It can be a lifetime process. But this sense of honoring it, like really honoring that this is part of our story, and it needs our care and our attention. And it can be a very big part of our identity. It can be something that really shapes us in a huge way for a long time. And it also doesn't need to confine us. That part of the meditation about space, about freedom, even in the midst of like the deepest fear, the most paralyzing and overwhelming fear, that seed of space and freedom is still there in the depths of our mind. So just like when the sky is very dark and rainy and cloudy and stormy and there's lightning and thunder, the sun is still shining. If we would go above the clouds, we would notice the sun was still shining. So we might live for many years in a storm where there's constant fear, and that's maybe all we've known. But it doesn't mean that the sun ever stopped shining and that it's not shining now. It's always shining. So it's possible when we, get resources, when we learn more mindfulness in our daily life. I mean, we can practice mindfulness in every moment of our life. As we brush our teeth, we can know we're brushing our teeth. As we sit on the toilet, we can know we're sitting on the toilet. Anytime we bring our attention into the present moment, we're not feeding the seed of fear. Anytime we bring our attention into our body to notice what's here and now, we're taking energy away from that part of ourself that lives in the past and that is caught in that fear of what happened to us in our childhood. That daily, moment by moment, every time we take a step and just realizing I'm stepping right now, this is my right foot, this is my left foot, we're nourishing sanity, we're nourishing stability, we're nourishing in us the ability to not be carried away when the fear arises. So that daily practice, not just in our sitting meditation, but in our mindful eating, our mindful drinking, mindful working, when we vacuum, when we sweep, knowing, following the motions of our body. There's a beautiful book with mindful verses to help us be mindful in all different times of our day. It's called Present Moment, Wonderful Moment. I really recommend this practice of mindful gathas, to mindfulness verses, to help us be mindful when we wash the dishes, to help us be mindful as we eat, to help us be mindful when we open the window, when we wake up in the morning, when we go to bed. All these moments we can infuse with presence, and that diminishes our fear. That diminishes the trauma of our childhood, because we're not living in that past story, right? So this is more than, this would, your question deserves much more time and attention, and we don't have it. But I would encourage you to read books about healing trauma if you haven't. That also there's mindfulness-based trauma resources. That The Body Keeps the Score is a beautiful book about trauma. Many more that also help us to become embodied, live in the present, and slowly, as we get more resourced, we can massage that block of suffering so it's no longer imprisoning us. And it is a process, and we need to be very gentle and very respectful of the speed we need to go to heal it. It's not something anyone else can dictate. We need to learn for ourselves what's the speed that's going to work for us to slowly begin to heal. So I'm so grateful for everyone, for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. I have a website. I'll leave you the link right here, kairajewel.com. I also have a newsletter that I send out every so often with teachings that I give, sometimes guided meditation, sometimes a written transcript of a Q&A. So sign up for the newsletter on kairajewel.com. Stay in touch with me. You can send me some of these questions that we didn't get to. I have a contact page on my website. I'm happy to write to you some thoughts after this. Thank you all so much for your practice, for your presence, for our time together today. And may we offer up the merit together. May the merit, the good energy of our meditation, of our receiving and practicing the Dharma, of our question and answer time, of our deep looking, of our sincere practice, may all of that benefit all beings everywhere, so that we all can leave the forest of confusion and fear and hatred and violence and destroying our planet, and heal the collective trauma that we are all a part of, so that the joy, the health, the living in harmony with the earth, the treating each other as family can become a reality for our generation, for all future generations. So may we all live safely and beautifully in this next year, in this next new decade. Thank you all.